Big Ten Media Days tells us that football is not far behind. We will be able to put the talk away, but for right now, we talk about what was talked about. And Kirk Ferentz and players hit Indianapolis today in day one of 2 Big Ten Media Days. This is Hawkeyes Live, of course, here at the Voice of College Football, our 52nd edition. And if I do the math correctly, that means 1 year going strong here with Corey Bratta from the Hawkeye of the Storm. Corey.
How are you, Mark? We're both out of our element. Like, you got out of your element a week or two ago. Now I'm out of my element. We're just falling apart. But the show must go on, right? The show must go on.
That's the cliche, but we're going to live up to it here today. And hopefully, as long as everybody can see us and more importantly, hear us clearly, it's all good. So we're going to talk a little Purdue football later in the hour as we continue our matchup series of Iowa's opponents for 2022. But of course, again, Big Ten Media Days in Indianapolis. And I saw Kirk Ferentz's appearance there at the podium. I can't say that anything really jumped out at me. I think that right out of the gate, he took a very measured approach to, and I think I know that he's done this in the past. I wouldn't know all the times as you would, but I very much respect that he takes a point and emphasis to balance the football with the education and the experience at the university and the higher end reasons why student athletics exists. And so he talked about the pressure that's being placed on these players, the concern he has about college football. He didn't expound on that, but just stated, hey, we're at a place where I'm concerned about the game, concerned about college football, and kind of minimized, how many players from his particular program. And we're talking again about the program that does have the 6th most NFL players on rosters currently, but how few of them reach the NFL, and therefore how much importance lies in the other aspects of their education.
I'll lead with this based on what you just said. We've said this before, but I think it's worth repeating because there are going to be times this season. I foresee times this season, Mark, where we were critical of Kirk Ferentz. I mean, it's gonna happen.
See those times coming this hour.
But let me just say this before we, look at it from a balanced perspective. Kirk Ferentz is a really good human being. All right. He's a class act guy. That's my opinion. I know there's some people who think differently. I can tell you he is a really good man. I do think, the blood's thicker than water has gotten maybe in the way of some decisions that, I've been critical of and I've been outspoken about. But he's a very good man, and I think he absolutely is genuine when he speaks on behalf of his student athletes and concerns. I saw he got ripped by people on Twitter for the comment about, I don't really like where college football is going right now. He's just saying what everybody else is thinking. I mean, I think there is a fine line between being outspoken on these things and, stabbing yourself in the back. What Gary Barta did weeks ago, basically going on the record and saying that he was actively advocating against the one-time transfer rule, which now that seems to be going in the opposite direction, right, Mark? The reports are that perhaps we're going to be in a real free agency frenzy here soon, where basically you can transfer. My understanding is you can transfer as many times as you want without punishment. But I think there's a fine line. What Kirk said today, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I don't see how that damages the program. He was not asked specifically about the UCLA-USC moves, which I thought was interesting because if you watch PJ Fleck at the beginning, you watch Michael Locksley, I think all of them were asked about those moves. And part of the reason why he wasn't asked is simply because he had a longer opening statement. Scott Frost didn't have an opening statement. He got things kicked off and basically said, no, I don't have anything to say, which I thought was interesting. At the same time, what can you say? It's do or die. You don't win this year, you're done. I think we all know that. So yeah. But Kirk said what everybody else is thinking. Nobody in their right mind wants this to be free agency. Maybe some players do, but I think, as I've talked about in the past, some players who are going to use that transfer portal and treat it like free agency without any discipline or any consequence for transferring 2, 3, 4 times is going to damage other student athletes because it's going to hurt teams and camaraderie and chemistry and relationships. So I do think that's 99% of people out there that are being honest would agree with Kirk. But there is the other side of the coin where coaches take the approach of there's no point in complaining about it because it's here and we have to adapt. And I see that side very much so. I do. And I think Kirk, to some extent, has taken that on, has taken some time here throughout this year. But we didn't hear any of the coaches prior to Kirk say anything negative about USC and UCLA. And I was very much hoping that they would get to that question, but we ran out of time. They only allow 15 minutes per coach. And by the time Kirk got done with his opening statement, I think we had 6-7 minutes. And of course, he usually provides longer answers to people. So not anything groundbreaking in his press conference to the media at large. However, he was asked later, and he was asked specifically about personnel. And we can get to this if you want to talk about it now, Mark. We've got some time. Justin Britt is out for the season. Disappointing news. I was not aware of that. I don't think the media was aware of that. He was certainly in line to start at left guard for Iowa. He's struggled his career. He's had his ups and downs. A lot of those have been injury related, but physically he looks the part. Athletically, he certainly has the ability to be a really good Big Ten guard. He just can't stay healthy. And it's tough because Iowa needs that experience. So now, Mark, we've talked about this. You lose Linderbaum, Cody Ince, Kyler Schott, and now Justin Britt. You lose your top four interior linemen. Now, if you want to throw Connor Colby in the mix and say he was, Connor Colby's really good. He's got a lot to prove because he struggled last year too. I know there's a lot of hype around him. He's going to be an all Big Ten player, future first-round draft pick. That may be. But you're basically losing your top 4 interior linemen from the last 2 to 3 years. That's a big blow. Jackson Ritter, wide receiver, who was a walk-on. I believe he's still a walk-on. He's out for the season as well. And you may say, well, who cares? He's a walk-on. First of all, I'm pretty sure his teammates care and his family cares. But the other thing about it is Jackson Ritter was going to play. He was the only other guy besides Bruce Johnson and Reganey that had real game experience on the offensive side of things. Remember, he played a decent role in that Cyhawk win last year against Iowa State. So it's not like he was just playing garbage time. Jackson Ritter is a guy who I think certainly has the potential to earn a scholarship. So with him being out as well, those are 2 big blows. And Mark, that wide receiver room is not deep with losing Tyrone Tracy, with losing Charlie Jones, and not, you bring in one guy in recruiting and then 0 in the transfer portal. So that was disappointing, but I'm guessing that's pretty standard. I didn't follow the rest of the coaches. I had other things I needed to do today, but I'm guessing that other teams are suffering from similar injuries, unfortunately.
Leave the comments and questions there in the live chat. We will get to them here on Hawkeyes Live. And of course, do all those good things that help grow the channel. Hit the like button before you get settled. And certainly bring some folks with you here each and every Tuesday at 4:30 Central Time. Subscribe to the Voice of College Football. Get on over to From the Hawkeye at the Storm and subscribe there as well. The only other points of note that, and most of these were in response to questions, not necessarily the opening statement, which had more to do with let's look at the total student athlete. And I've got some concerns about college football. And all of that was there's a competition for place kicker, and asked a couple questions about the coaching staff and about Brian Ferentz in particular. One had to do with the coaching staff receiving a 31% pay increase, and Brian Ferentz did not receive as large of an increase. But I thought Kirk's response was I don't know if it's accurate. I'm going to assume that it's accurate, take him at his word. But it was well explained just in regards to the review process and wanting to fairly compensate everyone based on tenure and performance.
I believe he said he was asked. I thought it was a pretty good question. I can't remember who it was that asked the question, but the reporter basically asked, it's a considerably smaller increase. I mean, it's not even now. He was making more, but if you look at Phil Parker, he was set to make $1.1 million this next year, which was already a bump. He got a $200,000 raise from $1.1 million. Brian was at $860, gets promoted to a more prestigious position, not only as play caller, offensive coordinator, but as quarterbacks coach, and he only gets $40,000 more. He was asked, is that directly due to performance? And I think Kirk said no, but the answer is yes. You cannot imagine the uproar had Brian made $1 million. Like, he's already making 8.6. Like, not if you're smart, and Kirk Ferentz is a very smart individual, you're not going to give Brian Ferentz some substantial raise, but you also got to give him a raise, right? From a PR perspective, you can't not give him a raise. Everybody else is getting raises. He's the only guy who got promoted during the offseason. You have to give him something, but it was the right move. And I talked about it on my channel. It was the right move to give him what he gave him. I don't know that everybody agrees with that. I know I've been very outspoken. People may say, I've had people already say, well, he didn't deserve any raise. I get where you're coming from, but you have to look at this collectively. And given the PR side of it, because that's a big part of this, I think it was the right move to give him what they gave him. I did think, I said this in my segment that I published on my channel earlier in the week, I thought giving Raymond Brathwaite a 50% raise was a little bit premature. I mean, Raymond Brathwaite's trying to replace the best strength and conditioning coach in the country, and it's been 2 years now, and maybe he's doing it. But, I mean, Mark, you've seen Iowa in the trenches. They haven't been great since Chris Doyle left. Now, I don't know if you attribute that directly to Chris Doyle. There's personnel changes. There's certainly, you have to look at Kelvin Bell and Jay Neiman, who are working the defensive line, and certainly Phil Parker. But, I mean, strength and conditioning is a big part of offensive line performance. And there were times last year where Iowa got bullied along that offensive line. So I was a bit critical of that to some extent. Hopefully there are going to be some big gains that we're seeing, and maybe they're already seeing them behind the scenes. And then Kelton Copeland was given, I believe, a 35% increase. Don't shoot me if I'm misquoting the USA Today, but that one again, everybody's getting raises. Kelton Copeland has to do better. He's got to do better. Right now, he's struggling on the recruiting trail. Besides the Bruce and Johnson pickups, he's struggled for the most part in 22, 23, and so far 24. It's still early for 24. And that receivers, it's not like the receivers have produced at some high level. You mentioned this in a previous show. No Iowa receiver caught more than 27 passes all of last season. So those are the two that I would be critical of. I wasn't real critical of the Brian raise, and I'm certainly not critical of Phil Parker making $1.3 million. Yes, that's a lot of money, but it is what it is. You got to pay your assistants, or like Kirk brought up today, they're going to go somewhere else. And, credit Kirk Ferentz and his agent, because the $7 million that was distributed, that's being distributed for these salaries of these assistants, was part of the agreement that Ferentz's agent came to with the University of Iowa. So every year, it seems like every time Kirk gets an extension, you pencil in another W for Kirk and his team. And I don't know what to say other than, if you're going to blame anybody, blame Gary Barta and blame the Iowa administration, because it was part of the raises are part of the Ferentz extension.
So the one thing that I did think that was stated without being stated, and you certainly led into something there that didn't necessarily cross my mind, but about the raises. So the last point that I'll make concerned Brian as well, and that's when it was asked, okay, Brian Ferentz has been promoted. What was I forget what the question was, but basically just, expound upon that. So Kirk Ferentz talked about he had the golden opportunity, as would be the case in most of these situations, where a head coach would then run down the qualifications and the attributes that caused the promotion and then led to that person's value on the staff. Kirk Ferentz didn't do that. He basically said, well, it's a situation where I would like to have the play caller and the quarterback coach be the same person, because it takes out the middleman and it's a more efficient mode of communication. We've brought on John Budmeyer to, assist and support and, provide his expertise. And that was the answer.
Yeah. And he's said that before. I mean, that has been stated several times. He's never fallen back on, well, Brian's performance made him become the QB's coach that caused me to appoint him as that. The argument can still be made that just because you want the play caller, I mean, a lot of people would say, okay, let's have the play caller and the QB's coach be the same individual. It just shouldn't be Brian. But here's the deal. We're going to get to see it in a little over a month. John Budmeyer, by the way, is being paid now. His contract with Colorado State ran out at the end of the fiscal year this summer, so he's now being paid as an analyst. Still can't work, still has the same obligations and cannot work on the field with student athletes, instructional and whatnot. But hopefully, when I had Chuck Hartley on my show, Mark, here a little over a week ago, he was adamant that John Budmeyer is going to help Iowa. And Chuck Hartley he is a bit biased because John Budmeyer is a member of the family now, having married Chuck's niece. But he was pretty adamant that John's going to help. So maybe that's true. The other thing we haven't gotten to, Mark, but I know we have our Purdue guest coming on here soon. Do you want to talk specifics as it relates to the depth chart? I published something this afternoon about the offense. Do you want to just kind of run through the depth chart?
Absolutely. Is there anything in particular that you want to point out that surprised you, or do you just want to start top to bottom?
Well, I'll kind of go top to bottom. I did this on the show, so this is a kind of a carryover. That's fine. I won't cover it as extensively as I did on my channel. But as far as wide receivers are concerned, I mentioned the Jackson Ritter blow. That hurts when you already lose. Again, Tracy. They lost several guys to. They also lost Quavon Matthews to the transfer portal during the offseason, another scholarship wide receiver. So you lose Tracy Jones, Quavon Matthews. Now you lose Jackson Ritter. And so they are really thin when you only bring in one guy. I mean, you're bringing in one guy, Mark, to replace four. That's substantial. So Alec Wick is listed as wide receiver 2 behind. Well, I should say wide receiver 4, right? Because you have Reganey, the two different positions. You got Reganey, Bruce, Johnson. Those are your top 3. And then Alec Wick, who's a Regina kid. And I mentioned this on my segment I published earlier today. I have heard good things about Wick. He broke all kinds of records at Regina. Don Patterson has said to me in private, and this is, I'll go out on a limb and say this because this is, I remember this conversation I had with Don. He said the one guy I would watch for in the receiver room would be Alec Wick. Now, he's not, predicting that Wick's going to be the all-time receptions leader at Iowa when he's done. But he's a local kid who's really athletic and flying under the radar as a walk-on. And then at tight end, no surprises there with Laporta, Lachey. We know Stylianos would probably be number 3. No surprises at running back or fullback. Gavin Williams, LaShawn Williams, Monty Pottebaum, Turner Palisard. Right tackle's not a surprise to me, at least. Jack Plum and Nick DeYoung, who both struggled last year. They're a year older. It's now or never for Plum as a senior, and I'd say it's now or never for DeYoung as a junior. You got to take that bull by the horns. Left tackle, I think some people expected maybe David Cobb would emerge, but Mason Richmond, I think he's got a lot of upside. Right now, David Cobb is listed as the 2 behind Richmond. Maybe David Cobb slides over to right tackle if those other guys struggle. Justin Britt being down has slid Tyler Ellsbury into a starting role with Matt Fagan, who was listed as a backup center last year. He's listed as the backup at left guard. Logan Jones listed as Tyler Linderbaum's replacement, wearing the vaunted number 65. Michael Maslinski, young guy, redshirt freshman, listed behind him. Connor Colby at right guard, backed up by Bo Stevens. Quarterback, Mark, there's no surprise at quarterback with Petrus and then Padilla. Labus not listed here. And then the only other one on here, on the offensive side of things, which I know this is special teams, but listed on the offensive depth chart, is kicker. And Aaron Blom is listed as the starter. I said this earlier on my channel. I will be very surprised, Mark, if Drew Stevens is not the kicker week 1. I'll just say that. I'll be very surprised if this depth chart holds true. So my first reaction when I saw this was, what the heck? I was shocked. For a moment, you're shocked when you see Blom's name at the top because, again, I fully expect Stevens to be the starter. However, then I reminded myself, this is a preseason depth chart. And it's great. These are great talking points. I'm glad we can have these conversations. But in the grand scheme of things, in 4 weeks, 5 weeks, this will mean absolutely nothing. And so that's my prediction that Stevens will be your starter at place kicker. On defense, let me slide over to the defensive side of things. I'd say less surprises, although I was pleased to see Cooper DeJean listed as your starting cash. I've been a proponent of that, given his athleticism and his ability to cover. I mean, I'm fine with him covering receivers in the slot. Justin Jacobs listed as your starting Leo linebacker. When, of course, you're pulling 3 linebackers out in the field: Jack Campbell, Jay Higgins, Seth Benson, Kyler Fisher for the other 2 spots. So no surprises in those 3 or 4 positions in general. Cornerback, Jamari Harris. I was a little surprised by this. Jamari Harris listed as your starting left corner, given the fact that he's suspended for week 1. I'm not saying that he doesn't deserve that, and I have know nothing about Jamari Harris. Everybody's going to make mistakes. We talked about that back when he had that OWI earlier this year. But you almost think that maybe, when you have Terry Roberts, who's been in the program as long as he has, you would think that if it's a coin toss, you're probably going to go with the guy who doesn't have the OWI and who's not suspended week 1. But I'm not there every day. I don't know what's going on. I hope that I really hope the best for Terry Roberts. Not that I don't want to see Harris play this year, but Terry Roberts is a senior. He's worked his tail off on special teams. He's very good friends with former Iowa cornerback standout Jovan Johnson. So I hope he can emerge. But those are your 2 left corners: Riley Moss and Brendan Diaz-Fernandez listed on the right. At safety, Kayvon Merriweather, who was one of the 3 reps at Big Ten Media Days for Iowa, listed as your starting strong. Cooper DeJean listed as your backup there. So then the question comes up, you don't often see Iowa double up guys. I mean, it's going to happen at times, but if Merriweather goes down, how do they slide things around? Does DeJean come in and they put somebody else in at cash? Does it Sebastian Castro, or does somebody over at the other safety position slide over? Does it Reggie Bracey end up playing strong? Quinn Schulte, Reggie Bracey listed as your 2 free safeties. John Wagner listed as your left end. There's another example of a guy where it's do or die. It's his senior year. He's got to emerge. He's got the physical attributes you want in a dominant defensive end. Ethan Herkett, who was hurt early in the year last year, I've heard great things about him and his motor. Reminds me a little bit of like a Zach Van Valkenburg, honestly, when I've seen him play. And I've been somewhat critical of Iowa's defensive line last year because I didn't think Van Valkenburg was what you want in a number 1 defensive end on a Big Ten team. Not that he wasn't a good player. He was a solid player, but you'd much rather have that guy be your 2nd, 3rd, or 4th best defensive end to be able to run him in, especially on obvious passing downs. So Herkett will be backing up Wagner. Your other defensive end spot, Joe Evans, Deontay Craig. These guys are going to rotate out, as I've alluded to. At tackle, you've got Noah Shannon backed up by Lucas Van Ness, who I could also see running outside. Logan Lee and Y.A. Black at right tackle. And then what am I missing here? Punter, of course, Torrey Taylor. There's no backup listed here, but Phelps is your backup at punter. And then Luke Elkin listed as your long snapper. So nothing listed as far as punt return, kick return. And I don't know that that's deliberate, but that's probably a work in progress, because when we played spring ball, Charlie Jones was still around. So they got to figure that out. That's going to be a huge priority for LeVar Woods. That might be priority number 1 besides that place kicking battle. That may very well be the number 1 priority. Is it Riley Moss? Is it Cooper DeJean? Is it Wampa? I mean, you go all kinds of Arlen Bruce. They got candidates, but somebody's got to prove it's a special skill, as we've discussed in the past. It's a special skill, especially to return punts. So we'll see what happens. But there's your depth chart. Hope I didn't overload with information, but I love that. Even though I could to some extent say it's obsolete, I love talking about it because it proves it's just a signal that we're 30 days from week 0.
Yeah, the return game, it's a special skill. And at the very least, it's a secure the football and start the drive and don't make any mistakes or turn the ball over. But at its finest, and this speaks to Charlie Jones, you've got a weapon back there. You've got an offense. You've got a guy that's going to start your drive in better field position. He can make a big play. He can flip the field. He can do those things that are even more critical for this team than they are for most teams across the nation in setting up better field position. And he's playing for Purdue now.
And let's remember, he bailed them out of that Illinois game last year. He completely bailed them out. They're down 2 scores. He pops off a kickoff return for a touchdown. So his departure cannot be overstated. Is that the right term? It cannot be overstated or it cannot be understated, Mark. What's the proper term? It's like when people...
It cannot be overstated.
Yeah, see, it's like when people say, I could care less, which it's always irritated me, because if you could care less, then you must care,
yes.
Right?
I could not care less.
Yes,
I think
you couldn't.
It's gotten shortened through the years, and it just slides off the tongue. But of course, it can be. It's possible to overstate it, but the point is, yes, it's difficult to overstate.
Absolutely. So, no, they'll have to figure that position out. I also think, let me just make sure I got this link sent over to our Purdue guy. He's actually saying he didn't get it. There we go. I do think that Caden Wetjen's another guy. I haven't really talked about him a whole lot, but I've heard good things about him, especially during spring. We saw some glimpses of him during the open scrimmage. And, he could be a guy that you never know. Like they had not Gersonde, he's of course the punter. I'm trying to think of the guy they had, Kyle Groneweg, several years back, who was a JUCO transfer who nobody really heard of. He struggled a bit at punt return, but my point is, when you have a special skill like that, you just don't know who's going to emerge. Maybe it'll be Alec Wick. Like, who knows? It'd be great to have a story like that. Have a receiver. If you could get a receiver like a Wetjen or a Wick emerge, and even if it's on special teams, make an impact. Because if you throw Arlen Bruce out there, Mark, or Keegan Johnson, or Nico Reganey, who's done it before. Reganey has return punts. Boy, that'd be the one thing with Jackson Ritter out and Jones and Tracy gone. That would be the one thing that I'd be nervous about if I'm Kirk Ferentz and LeVar Woods. You don't want to put those wide receivers at risk. Their health is of utmost importance, because what happens if Keegan Johnson goes down? I mean, they are thin. So, again, we'll see what happens. But speaking of Charlie Jones, I see we have our Purdue guy coming in here pretty soon. But that battle will continue here throughout the fall for whoever returns both kicks and punts.
Erica, thank you so much for the Super Chat contribution. Disappointed, but not surprised that Spencer Petras is the starting quarterback or QB number 1 on the depth chart pre-August camp. Thank you so much for that. Erica, on the first weekend of November, Purdue and Iowa get back together, this time in West Lafayette. Of course, the Boilers have been a thorn in the side of Iowa football for the past 5 years, with 4 wins in 5 meetings, including a 24-7 win at Iowa City that almost derailed Iowa's Big Ten Western Division hopes had Wisconsin won their final game of the season. But again, Purdue and Iowa get together in a key Western Division game the first week of November. We've got Grant Michael on the line from Big Time Boiler to help us break down the Boilers. Hey, Grant.
Hey, guys. How's it going?
We're doing well. How are you?
Oh, I'm pretty good. Sorry, a little flustered. Just finally got checked into the hotel room about 2 minutes ago, so had to jump on here real quick.
Appreciate you tuning in, Grant, and I appreciate you kind of doing it on late notice. For anybody who's not familiar with Grant Michael over at Big Time Boiler on YouTube, you have done. Let's give our listeners a bit before we get into the Iowa Purdue matchup, which is why we brought you on. I want to give our listeners an idea of who you are. You have a background with YouTube as far as highlights and kind of compilation videos, right? For Purdue sports, you've been a diehard Purdue guy for I'm guessing your whole life. Kind of give people a background as to what you've done on YouTube and what you're doing now.
Yeah, just a diehard Purdue fan growing up. Both my parents went there, pretty much committed there when I was 5 years old, the only school I applied to. Back in YouTube was first started. I just was messing around with it and made highlight videos. Really nothing of it, just for fun. And then pretty much took a break for, 11 years. And actually, you two have watched you guys for the last couple of years, actually, and enjoy watching college football content on YouTube, and realize that there's 2 Purdue guys, I think, in the whole YouTube realm that do this. So I figured, I travel for work, in the Big Ten country, anywhere from 4 to 8 hours in my car, and figured, sometimes I get kind of bored. So why not make a few videos safely, as safe as I can while driving, and see where it goes. So no expectations, just thought I'd maybe give a Purdue voice out there.
And I'll just say this, and Mark, I'll let you take it from here. I reached out to Grant. I don't think either one of us, Mark, you and I don't normally just reach out to random people on YouTube, but I came across his content looking just down to some Purdue content creators, and Grant knows his stuff. So anybody who's new, I mean, I know you're new to the analytical side of running a YouTube channel, Grant, but if anybody's new and they want their fill on Purdue sports, Boilermaker sports, both basketball and football, head over to Big Time Boiler. Mark, we can get down to this matchup. Is there something else you want to cover before?
Well, I want to hear about Aiden O'Connell because he and Jack Plummer wrestled for this quarterback spot a number of times back and forth. Both of them were inserted at different times based on injuries and also based on performance and gaining the upper hand. And then O'Connell gets the opportunity, takes off with it about week 3 when he fully was entrenched. And now you see him on all sorts of lists, including mine as a top 10 to 15 quarterback in the nation. So, Grant, what's been the difference with Aiden O'Connell?
Well, it's kind of funny, Mark, to your point, ever since Jeff Brom's been here, it's been a flip-flop of quarterbacks every year, going back from David Blau and Elijah Sindelar. And even Jeff will even admit he keeps picking the wrong one last year with Jack Plummer. But Aiden O'Connell, he just kind of has, it's funny. He's got the it factor. He's a high percentage thrower. I think last year he was at 71%. I was rewatching the Tennessee bowl game last year, and there was a stat that came up, and I forgive me, I don't have it in front of me, but I think like the last 5 or 6 games of the season, he was on fire. He was like somewhere around 12 to 15 touchdowns with 0 interceptions. He's just extremely accurate. He's got command of the offense, 6th year, very mature. He's actually getting married this week. So he mature beyond his years, just a great leader, just very poised quarterback and very good for that Jeff Brom system.
I'll just say this, Mark. I know you're rearing to go still, but I think Aiden O'Connell is the second best quarterback in the Big Ten. I don't think there's a ton of debate right now. Like, I know Michigan fans want to anoint Cade McNamara, but which one? I always forget. JJ McCarthy, right? He's the one who's got all the hype. But he's not proven himself. Like Aiden O'Connell, that's one of the most prolific Iowa fans found out the hard way again, that the Purdue offense, and I give a lot of credit to Coach Brom for that, regardless of quarterback, is a prolific offense. And now you got a guy who can really sling it in O'Connell. Now, one thing they did deploy against Iowa, talking specifically about this matchup of this fall, Grant, is they deployed 3 quarterbacks against Iowa, which is so rare. And every one of those guys had a role, and a significant role in a game. It's not like it was garbage time. Those were meaningful snaps. So Plummer goes off to Cal. You'll be able to tell me who the other quarterback was, but do you see any role for a guy other than O'Connell?
Yeah, that other quarterback was Austin Burton, the grad transfer from UCLA. More of a runner, not the best passer, but I think he will have a place a little bit in this offense. I don't think you're going to see 3 quarterbacks like you did against Iowa, but who knows with Jeff Brom, he has a lot of tricks up his sleeve. There's actually a play in the spring game where they had all 3 quarterbacks on the field. So you never know with Jeff, but you might see Austin Burton as a Wildcat quarterback, especially depending how the run game goes. But yeah, I don't think you're going to see a 3 quarterback 3-headed monster like he did last year. I think this is Aiden all the way. And if there are 3 quarterbacks in a game, that's probably very bad news for us Purdue fans.
This is the one matchup, Mark, you and I have talked about it in the past. This is the one matchup that we don't talk about enough. And it's the one game for Iowa that's probably not portrayed as a rivalry, but from it's naturally a rivalry. Like, I don't care about the recent results are what they are. Purdue has actually dominated this series in recent time. There's some bad blood here. And Mark, I've been told that there have been things said. I know that there have been reports out there by Iowa media members that have indicated that there have been things said by Jeff Brom about the Iowa program. Now, whether those things are directly correlating to Brian Ferentz or to Kirk himself, there were reports here a few weeks ago in Jerron Tibbs, recent Purdue commit, when he was on campus for an official visit in Iowa City. There were rumors that Purdue was blowing up his phone during the visit. That didn't leave a good taste in the mouths of Iowa fans or the Iowa staff. So there is some of that natural rivalry feel here. And given the fact that Iowa has just struggled mightily against, Phil Parker, you know this, Grant. Phil Parker is one of the best in the business at shutting down opposing receivers. And David Bell has carved Iowa up year after year after year. And that's not an
it's not just David
exaggeration.
Bell.
Yeah,
going
you're right.
back to 2017, Anthony Mahungo, who was pretty much an unknown from France his senior year, lit up Iowa for 2 touchdowns. And then Terry Wright the next year gets 3 touchdowns. So it's that Jeff Brom scheme, which I'm kind of jumping forward here, but Purdue obviously has some question marks to replace that wide receiver, and I'm honestly not very worried about it, just looking at the history of what he can do with wide receivers.
And let's also remember that the one guy we're not bringing up as far as Purdue receivers might be the best of all, Rondale Moore, who didn't really get a chance against Iowa, right? He's always hurt against Iowa. So
yeah, he was hurt.
Very strange. Like I would expect is Phil Parker was, I know the comment was made, I believe it was Jeff Brom made the comment last year after the Iowa game, that he found it very odd that Phil Parker and Iowa decided to continue to cover David Bell one-on-one. That ain't going to happen this year. I don't. Phil Parker is a very intelligent individual, and despite the fact that he's been stubborn throughout this series, I see no way that during this offseason there aren't adjustments made. They are going to have Charlie Jones and Tyrone Tracy working on the other side. Your thoughts on those 2 transfers? Certainly, I think some of the bad blood, if you will, has come from those 2 guys leaving. And you can't blame either of those guys if you're trying to showcase your skills. Tyrone Tracy wasn't getting time here, and Charlie Jones, frankly, is not going to get a chance to showcase his wide receiver skills as much as he will in a pass-heavy offense. So just your thoughts on those 2 guys.
Yeah, it's great pickups for Purdue. Obviously, I can see why there would be some bad blood there, especially with Charlie Jones, as that had some question marks around it a little bit. But a lot of the Purdue media seem to be very high on Tyrone Tracy. He's going to be kind of that Jackson Anthrop running back, maybe 10 snaps a game role that Jackson kind of had towards the end of last year. He had a pretty good spring game. I'm more excited, though, about Charlie Jones. I think you guys are more familiar with I am, but watching the tape and watching him last year, and even going back to his Buffalo film, I think this guy could easily double his production from 318 yards, 3 touchdowns to, I'm saying 7 touchdowns and 700 yards. That's my crazy prediction. He's got a thing with Aiden O'Connell. Apparently, they're childhood friends, grew up together,
played football together, before high school.
And really, Purdue's got Brock Thompson, kind of who took off in the bowl game, but outside of that, Purdue has a loaded wide receiver room. The problem there is we have some guys that have not been able to stay healthy. And actually a lot of I think besides Tyrone Tracy and Jones, every one of our key contributors from last year is coming off some sort of surgery in the offseason. So, those 2 could be called upon quite a bit. And I would not be surprised, of course, how much Purdue throws the ball. I would not be surprised to see them have big time years.
And let's remember, Mark, you can attest to this. Purdue scored a ton of points against, albeit a middle of the pack, maybe slightly below average SEC team in the bowl game last year without David Bell, without Charlie Jones, and without Tyrone Tracy. So I don't. And
Milton Wright, no Milton Wright either.
Yeah, Milton Wright's gone as well because of academics, correct?
Yeah, he is. Yeah, that there was a hope that he might be able to get it together, but that door is officially closed, and he's no longer at Purdue.
So, Mark, anything to add? This is the one that I'm glad we're discussing. I'm glad we got you on here, Grant, because this is one of the most this is the game that I've had pegged for obviously since last year. I'd love to may even travel over to West Lafayette this year for this game. It's just a rivalry that maybe we'll start talking about more. Like, I don't know what I don't have Purdue's schedule in front of me. I know Purdue. I was looking at it earlier, and Mark and I have discussed this, Grant. I think Purdue and is it Nebraska? I'd have to look at the schedule. Purdue and Nebraska, I think, have the 2 easiest schedules in the Big Ten West. And I mean, if we're going off recent history, I ain't gonna pick Nebraska to be contending. You never know, but Purdue is the one team nobody's talking about, and that's a little scary. Like, if they get that running attack, you got Xander Horvath coming back this year, right?
No, Xander actually he's
gone. He went to okay, and
King Daru is back. We did offer we got a transfer in from Central Michigan, Kobe Lewis, who would not be surprised to take the job.
And perhaps even some snaps for Tracy in the backfield.
Yeah,
right?
and Tracy, yeah. Yep.
So I think it's a scary game, Mark, and I think Purdue is I haven't come out with my Big Ten West predictions, but they're a scary pick. And given the fact that Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa all have 2 very difficult crossover games, and Purdue has 1 very difficult crossover game. They beat Penn State week 1. They're the favorite from there on out. That's a fact. I mean, at least in my mind, it's a fact. Maybe people disagree. If they beat Penn State week 1, they're the favorite, Mark.
Yeah, from a scheduling standpoint, there's no question that they will have an upper hand. I think they even start the season with an upper hand because of what you just stated. You always have to look at those cross-division games in the Big Ten West. But I think that's a good time to catch Penn State. The place should be rocking on a Thursday night, national television, and everybody locked in on the beginning of college football. So, yeah, Purdue's an interesting team. They're fascinating. Grant, when you really look at the program, what's a realistic ceiling for this program? What is talked about in regards to Jeff Brom fully implementing everything? Of course, he's an offensive and passing game guru, but if you can have a serviceable run game, if the recruiting, and I don't know how you would evaluate the performance there, but I'm on the periphery, it seems to have been upgraded decidedly in recent years. That, what could be the expectations in a division that I find fascinating? People find that I talk to every day, that they're looking at the complete landscape of college football, find boring and there's no elite team. But to me, that's fascinating, that there is no clear-cut favorite. There's no power program. There's a lot of really good top 15 to 30 programs in this division. Makes it fascinating for me. And, where do you think Purdue's headed, and what do you think the ceiling is?
Well, I'll tell you this here, and this might make me sound like a homer, but with this schedule, in all honesty, I mean, Corey, you alluded to it. The Penn State game is absolutely monster. If they win that game, I mean, I don't see why 10-win regular season and a trip to Indy is not on the table. You got to play at Wisconsin. Until we beat them, we haven't beat them in like 20 years. That's a loss for me. There's a few, at Minnesota, that's another tough game. But other than that, I mean, Iowa obviously at Purdue, but Purdue gets them after coming off a bye. Honestly, anything below 8 wins this year would be a disappointment. So to answer your question, Mark, I think kind of with Jeff Brom, the way he's building this program is kind of the glory Joe Tiller years, if you will. 8 wins, 9-win seasons, which I think Purdue only has 1 10-win season in the history of the program. And he's doing it the right way. As you alluded to, recruiting has gone up tremendously. Of course, that's not saying much with Darrell Hazel, but he's getting top 25 classes. And one of my videos, I posted that Jeff Brom is actually, in this day and age of college football, is doing it the perfect formula for success at a program like Purdue. It's recruiting a top 40-ish recruiting class, and then bringing in, and this year he's bringing in 11 of these, but bringing in anywhere from 5 to 10 key transfers every single year. And you're going to lose guys every year to the transfer portal, but the key is to get better. Get better additions and subtractions. And so far he's doing that. And he's been actually recruiting the transfer portal, not the portal per se, but graduate transfers ever since he got to Purdue. So this is kind of a good formula for Jeff. And finally, after it took a little bit after the 17 and 18 season due to depth and stuff, but I think he's got his most deep team he's ever had. And we all expect big things here in West Lafayette.
Desmond's asking about the 10-win season. My guess, and this, I would not stake my mortgage on this, but I think that was under Mark Herman.
Yeah, possibly, or even, it's either Herman or before that even. It's definitely not with Breeze.
Or maybe one of the great late 60s teams under Bob Greasy or Gary Danielson after that, going to the Rose Bowl in 1968. Yeah.
They may actually not have, think about it, it may not be any. They may have never gotten a 10-win season.
I know Herman went to 9-2 one year, so I can't remember what they did in the bowl game. I think 1979, 80. I'll have to give that a gander, but Drew Brees didn't get there.
Mark, let me just correct this real quick. I want to give Grant credit. Appreciate him coming on. If you're going to search for his YouTube channel, it's The Big Time Boiler, spelled out how I have it. Correct, Grant? I want to make sure, because I tried to search just a second ago, just Big Time Boiler with a space between.
What I think is you've got to put channel in the search.
That would probably
if you
help.
do that, I found it. I dropped it in the chat. So the link's in the chat, everyone. It's capitalized. You see Big Time Boiler link right here, and you can catch it right there in the chat.
Mark, anything? Trying to think if there's anything else before we let Grant slide. We covered Charlie Jones and Tyrone Tracy, and certainly the recent history. And I think there is some bad blood here. But anything else? I will say this one more thing, Grant, then we'll let you slide. You brought up the schedule, and yeah, Purdue's going at Wisconsin. Give you an example of if you looked at Iowa's schedule. Not only does Iowa go on the road to Columbus, you play Michigan at home, you play Wisconsin at home, you go at Minnesota, at Purdue. So, I mean, like, everybody's got a tough schedule in this conference. And Mark made a good point earlier. The Big Ten West is sometimes, because of the top dogs in the East, is looked at as the lesser of the two, which is fine. But, when you still get 3 crossover games, there's not an easy schedule in the Big Ten. Iowa had it about as easy as you're going to get last year. Getting Maryland, getting Indiana, getting Penn State without Clifford for most of that game. So the schedule works out very well for Iowa. That could for Purdue. That could be this game we're previewing could very, very well determine the conference championship, as could the Iowa-Wisconsin game or the Iowa-Minnesota game. But given the schedule, if Iowa has a chance to win this division, it very well may be dependent on beating Purdue. Mark, anything else to add?
Well, for the record, yes, I got it on that one. Mark Herman and Purdue 10-2 in 1979. Yes.
There you go. One and only.
All right, Grant. Appreciate the time, sir. And I would love to have you back maybe week of the game to preview. Yeah. Hopefully this is going to be a marquee game. It very well could be. And we look forward to it. Appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, guys. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Appreciate Grant being here. Great breakdown on Purdue football. And the Boilers need to be paid attention to. Again,
Absolutely.
That first night against Penn State, I am looking forward to that game.
That's going to be like such a why do I feel giddy just talking about that game? I'm a Purdue Penn State fan. That's a heck of a game for a Thursday night.
Yeah,
I mean that is just that's a juggernaut game. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And just one more plug in for Grant, the Big Time Boiler. Check out his stuff because he knows his Purdue sports, and we'll continue. We'll try to finish our schedule previews here in the coming weeks. I know now that we're getting closer to fall camp, we got to wrap this thing up. But I've enjoyed this series. I give you the credit. You're the one who came up with the idea to kind of look at the one team each week, and I've enjoyed it. I know some of our listeners have, and hopefully a lot of our listeners. I do want to. Can I address a question that was from Rick in the chat, Mark?
Sure.
I didn't want to ignore this, but it was earlier, and I did miss it because we were just ready to get. Bring Grant in. Let's see if I can find it here. Let's see. Here it is. Rick says, appreciate this, Rick. I like the show, but you seem down on Iowa a lot. Do you think at all that Petrus can improve? First of all, Mark, am I down on Iowa? I'm just getting your opinion.
You're realistic. You're realistic.
I'm not. If I'm portraying myself that way, Rick, I'm sorry. I do think that Iowa has a chance to win this division. I think I've said that. Now, I've not come out with my predictions. I'm not saying I'm going to predict them. They're going to win the West. I did last year, given the schedule and given what they had returning. I am not down collectively. I am down on the offense. Petrus and the offense have to prove it to me before I'm going to start buying into the hype. Like I had Tony Rasiopi on my show here a few weeks ago. He's a great guy. I believe they're obviously working very hard, but the proof is in the pudding. And until I see Spencer Petrus go out there and throw for more than 60% and at least double, cut in half his interception number and double his touchdown number, I don't believe that this is a team that is going to win. I mean, maybe you win 10 games if he can throw for 60% and, what's the magic number? Is it 13 touchdowns, 6 picks? It depends on how well you run the ball, Mark, but it's hard because the wide receiver room keeps getting smaller. Like, we're already talking about a quarterback that struggled last year with Charlie Jones, with Tyrone Tracy, with the Johnson and Bruce tandem. And I know they were freshmen. They're going to get better. I get that. Reganey was there. They already had Laporta. Lachey was young. He's going to get better. I just don't know, unless Johnson and Bruce have made this massive jump, I just don't know. And the offensive line's the other concern. Like, the offensive line did not look good at the end of spring, and now you lose Britt. those are two positions, Mark, that it's frustrating losing those two guys. You don't want to lose anybody. If you lose a linebacker, like as great as Iowa's linebacker tandem is, I have confidence in Seth Wallace to be able to, maybe Jay Higgins steps into a role, or you lose a cornerback and they're somewhat thin, but you have trust in Phil Parker. The offensive line and wide receiver are the two of the biggest positions of concern for me on this entire team. I would probably go quarterback, offensive line in general, and then wide receiver as my three biggest positions of concern. So you just don't want attrition there. So in answer to your question, Rick, I don't mean to sound down on Iowa in general. I do think Iowa has an excellent chance to get to 8 or 9 wins in the regular season. If the offense takes a jump, they can win this division and get to 10 wins. I think they could even win this division with a slightly better offense, but they may have to have some help from the teams around them. This is a year where most of these West contenders all have difficult schedules, with the exception being Purdue. So I think the winner of this division could end up being a 9-win team, Mark. It could end up being a 6-3 team. No guarantees there, but I could see that happen. It could be an 8-4 team, I suppose, if they lose one in the non-con. So I'm not down in general, but there's a lot to be proven still. I don't buy into the offseason hype. I'm not trying to rip media members who are pushing the Iowa narrative. I'm not. I mean, they push the Iowa narrative, Mark. I'm not. I would never, ever. I respect the people who are busting their butts covering the Iowa media, and I'm sure it's not just Iowa, but I get so tired of reading basically cheerleading is what it is. It's just like when I go to read Iowa sports information, I'm not going to read something that I would read on HawkeyeSports.com. I want something that's fairly down the middle. I understand you're running a Hawkeye website, or you're a newspaper running a Hawkeye feature. You're going to be. I mean, I'm a fan, Mark, and there's going to be times where I'm promoting and I'm excited. And I think to some extent, some of the media members are more fans than they are media people. It's just, and again, I'm not going to throw anybody under the bus, but I just don't buy into that type of hype. And I get real tired of it because I don't think it's fair to the fans, but it's what produced clicks. It's what fans want to hear in the offseason. People want to hear that Spencer Petras has made some big jump. Like that video of him throwing a 70-yard bomb at the Manning Passing Academy got like 80,000 views. People want to believe that. I want to believe that. But see, for me, I've gotten bit because I've bought into that, and it's got to be proven to me. I hope that it will be. I plan on attending the open scrimmage on August 13th, and we'll see then. But I'm not down on Iowa. I'm cautiously optimistic.
I find it amusing when people get excited watching quarterbacks throw the ball 70 yards down the field in shorts. It shows that the guy belongs playing in the Big Ten. He belongs being recruited and signed by a Big Ten team because he can throw the ball 70 yards, but that's not reading a defense. That's not with any kind of pressure. That's not making decisions. It's just not that important. It's like watching a guy hit home runs in batting practice when the ball's coming straight at him at 70 miles an hour. It's just, it's nice to watch, but it doesn't mean anything to me. It means very little. I should say that. It means very little. Not that it means nothing. The other point is that, we've got, let's say, just take the Big Ten, 14 teams, and we've got 3 units on each team. That's 42 units. There are very few where there is just a decided plus or minus. Ohio State's offense is great. Northwestern's offense is horrible. Wisconsin's defense is typically near great. Most, if we were talking about the Maryland offense, we could talk all day and dissect the good points, the down points. They turn the ball over too much, but they create a ton of big plays. And we could have this back and forth about what needs to be fixed. The Iowa offense has just been awful, and the defense and the special teams have been excellent. So it's been a very simple conversation. And you and you being an objective fan, I'll put it that way, and me just being an objective commentator, it's very, the frustrating part has been, okay, you've got an offense that ranks 120 in the nation. What did you do with it? with the opportunities that are unlike any other time in the history of college football, you don't do anything about it.
Yeah. They know they did. They promoted within, Mark. It's and I'm with Rick. He said it. Rick just said it in the chat. I want Iowa's offense to be good. Okay. I want it as much as anybody else. And I am going to be on the edge of my seat. I'm not sitting back like hoping Iowa fail. I want Iowa's offense to be electric. And college football is a great time of year. Love getting together with friends and family and being able to watch these games. College football is an event. It's not just a game, Mark. It's the only sport that I view specifically as an event. And that's why I get so excited for it. That's why you had me out at 4:30 in the morning doing that college game day thing. You like how I put the blame on you for that?
Yes, I ordered you.
Yes.
No, I thought you were crazy when you suggested it. And I'm like, yeah, go right ahead. Sure.
That's why, because it's an event and I enjoy it. And it's the shortest season. And so I am going to be hoping with everything inside of me, Mark, that I'm wrong about the offense and that, but there are ways that it can improve. Like if Johnson and Bruce make big jumps, if the offensive line make big jumps, if Petrus makes a big jump, if all of a sudden these running backs come on strong. Yeah. I mean, we just don't know it until I see it. I'm going to be speculative.
Erica, thank you so much for the second super chat here. We appreciate that so much. Agree with Corey on this. It's all about money.
True. Very, very true. And Cameron Souter, Mark, this is probably a better question for you. Do you think developing an elite defense is harder than devolving an elite offense? Devolving? Developing. Okay, he just spelled it wrong. Do you think it's harder to develop an elite defense and an elite offense? I think it's hard. I think it's harder to develop an elite defense. Do you agree with that?
So my mind did flip-flops within the first 5 seconds of asking that question, because I went with the Wisconsin example of recruiting mostly 3-stars and developing these just tremendous defenses, and particularly front sevens. But then I flip-flopped to, we've seen in the modern age of college football and the proliferation of the passing game, you would think, well, you need to recruit these just amazing athletes and freakish athletes. Sure, it helps. It's a game of athleticism. But if you can get a quarterback who can throw on time and throw accurately, and you get guys that understand defenses and how to beat a man or how to beat the zone. Look at Mike Leach's offense. He recruits a bunch of 3-stars. Now he's getting a higher grade now at Mississippi State, but when he's at Washington State or Texas Tech, a lot of lightly regarded players that scored a zillion points because they learned how to execute within his scheme.
And also, Michael Locksley, it's a perfect example. You can be somewhat gimmicky and score points. You can't be gimmicky with defense. Like, you can blitz a lot, right? You can blitz a lot and hope you get to the quarterback. But, I think Locksley's a good example. Schiano's a good, listen, Rutgers has had its bad years, but I think Rutgers, even though Schiano's a defensive coach, has an opportunity. They have if you recruit a few, on the flip side of what you said, if you recruit just a few of these big skill position players, these playmakers, I think you have an opportunity to make plays early. Good example of that, we're talking about time it takes. Some of the easier positions for freshmen to play are running back and wide receiver. And I understand quarterback's not the same, but it's harder at times. Now, we see Iowa play cornerbacks at an early age, but that's why I would probably go, it's harder to develop a defense that's elite. And Purdue's another example. Brom gets there, and it looks like, wow, they're actually better on defense. Within the snap of a finger, it's flipped, right? And I know the coaching staff had some issues, but that would be my great question. Great question from.
It is a great
Cameron.
question. And while it's still extremely important and to your advantage to build, acquire the talent and build an offensive line that's dominant, it's not as important depending on the style of offense. Again, if you've got a quarterback that gets the ball out of his hand, your offensive line doesn't have to be nearly as dominant. And if you're throwing the ball 75% of the time, then you don't have to mash people up front, and you've minimized a weakness there.
Absolutely.
All right. For a 50-second time, Iowa Hawkeyes Live, we will dive into a second year of Hawkeyes Live with Corey. And that will happen next Tuesday at 4:30 Central Time. So please join us there. And then in the meantime, get on over to Corey's channel from the Hawkeye of the Storm. Check it out and lock in on basketball and football coverage there with Corey. All right, sir.
Appreciate the time, Mark. Football around the corner. Let's enjoy fall camp. It's going to be here soon.
At this time next week, we'll be staring straight ahead at fall camp, and we'll preview August for everyone. So we'll see you then.